My son-in-law told his golf buddies that I was the kind of man who peaked in a paint-stained work shirt and never figured out how to move on from there. He said it at my daughter's dinner table, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen where I was washing my hands. He thought I was too old to catch it, or maybe he just didn't care. Either way, I heard every word. I'm Frank Morrison, 66 years old, and for the last 11 years I've let my daughter believe I was getting by on the modest proceeds of a one-truck painting operation and whatever I'd managed to save from her mother's life insurance. What my daughter Claire and her husband Derek never knew was that the little paint business I mentioned once at Christmas in 2016 had quietly become Morrison Industrial Coatings, a protective surface solutions company with operations across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Georgia, servicing petrochemical plants, bridge infrastructure contracts, and municipal water treatment facilities, with 430 employees and annual revenues of $67 million. When Derek sat me down 6 weeks ago to explain, very patiently, the way a man explains things to someone he considers slow, why it would be in everyone's best interest if I signed the deed to my property over to them for estate planning purposes, I didn't argue. I just nodded and told him I'd think about it. Then I made 3 phone calls. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this story is about what happens when the people closest to you decide you've outlived your usefulness. Most people see exactly what Derek Walsh sees when they look at me, a man in his mid-60s with hands that are never quite fully clean, permanent faint traces of industrial primer under the nails no matter how hard you scrub. Someone who drives a 2006 GMC Sierra with a cracked dashboard and a toolbox in the bed that rattles on every highway joint between Nashville and Chattanooga. A man who brings a $12 bottle of wine to dinner parties and wears the same Navy Carhartt jacket he's worn since 2014. Derek Walsh, 38 years old, Harvard Law, senior partner at Mercer and Walsh downtown, drives a leased black Porsche Cayenne, and has never once in 7 years of marriage to my daughter asked me a single question about what I actually do for work. Not one question. Claire Morrison Walsh, 34, interior design firm she co-owns in the Gulch neighborhood, drives a white Mercedes GLC, and calls me every Sunday out of genuine love, which makes what happened harder, not easier. The first warning sign came 8 months ago at Thanksgiving. Derek started referring to my property as the Morrison land in conversations with his father. Then it became the acreage out in Williamson County, like I was already gone. Then just the land, possessive, like it belonged to the conversation instead of to me. Patrick Walsh, Derek's father, retired from a general contracting business he'd sold for a comfortable sum, had been coming to family dinners for 3 years. And every time he came, he walked through my house, the same way a man walks through a property he's already decided to purchase, measuring with his eyes, checking the bones of the place. The second warning sign happened when Claire started bringing her design business partner, a woman named Ashley, out to my property under the guise of checking in on me. They'd walk the acreage, Ashley photographing things on her phone, the two of them whispering about sight lines and zoning potential and what you could build on this parcel if you tore out the old workshop. "Don't mind us, Daddy," Claire would say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're just thinking through some ideas. On land I'd owned for 22 years. Land I'd bought with the money from the very first real industrial contract I ever won, a water tower resurfacing job in Murfreesboro that nearly killed me in August heat, but paid enough to put a down payment on 31 acres in Williamson County when the market was soft. What none of them knew was that the workshop they were photographing for its tear-down potential was the original facility where I'd formulated the zinc-based epoxy coating system that now held 2 patents and was licensed to 3 competing firms for use on federal infrastructure projects. What none of them knew was that every Tuesday and Thursday morning I drove that crack-dash Sierra to the Morrison Industrial Coatings headquarters in Franklin, Tennessee, where 61 people reported directly to me. The real breaking point came 5 weeks ago, when Derek organized what he called a family financial conversation. He'd invited his parents, Patrick and Sandra Walsh, and his older brother, Connor, who ran the Walsh family's remaining real estate holdings. They arrived at my house like they were attending a closing. Patrick immediately went to the window and pointed at the tree line. You've got a drainage issue along that eastern fence line, Frank. That's going to be a foundation problem inside of 5 years. I built my workshop foundation with a drainage contractor I'd known for 20 years. There was no drainage issue. Sandra Walsh set her purse on my kitchen counter like she'd already moved in. Derek stood in the center of my living room with his hands in his pockets the way he does in courtrooms when he wants to appear reasonable. Dad, Patrick's just trying to help you understand the maintenance reality of a property this size at your stage of life. My stage of life? I'm 66. I run 4 miles every morning on the gravel road behind my property. I still crawl steel frameworks with my crew on inspection days, because I believe a leader who won't go where he sends his people has no right to send them anywhere. And Derek was standing in my living room talking about my stage of life. Connor Walsh spoke up from where he'd positioned himself near the fireplace. Frank, here's what we're seeing from an asset management perspective. You're sitting on 31 acres in one of the fastest appreciating corridors in Middle Tennessee, conservatively worth $2.8 million in the current market, possibly $3.2 if you move within the next 18 months. That's a significant holding for someone in your situation. My situation. Someone who brings $12 wine to dinner parties and drives a truck with a cracked dashboard. Patrick leaned forward. The workshop structure alone is a liability. Old electrical, old ventilation. If something happened out there, Frank, you'd be exposed. You could lose everything. I knew every wire in that workshop. I'd had the whole facility brought up to OSHA standards for industrial coating operations at a cost I wasn't going to share with Patrick Walsh. Sandra put a hand on my arm with the practiced warmth of a woman who has given bad news in comfortable rooms her whole life. Frank, dear, these years should be about simplifying, not managing land and equipment and all of this. She gestured at my workshop, visible through the kitchen window. Derek stepped closer. What we're proposing is straightforward. You transfer the deed to Claire and me now, while it's a clean transaction. We'll have a right of residence agreement drawn up so you can stay in the house for up to 2 years while you make a comfortable transition. Patrick's already spoken to a builder who can break ground on the new structure within 6 months of transfer. The new structure. On my land. They had already spoken to a builder. I looked at my daughter. Claire was looking at the floor. I asked her directly, Claire. She looked up. Daddy, we just think it's the right time to be strategic about this. This is a lot for you to manage alone. Since Mom passed. It's been 3 years since Margaret passed. I manage 31 acres, 430 employees, and a $67 million business. I think I can handle grief and property taxes simultaneously, but I didn't say that. I said I'd need some time to think it through. Connor Walsh was already on his phone, probably texting the builder. Derek nodded the way he nods in depositions when the witness says something he'll use later. That night, I sat on my back porch, where Margaret and I used to sit after Claire went to bed, where I'd taught Claire to identify constellations when she was 9 years old, and I thought about the daughter I'd raised, who had looked at the floor instead of at me, who had let her husband conduct this meeting in my house while she examined her own shoes. The email came 4 days later. Subject line, Morrison Property Transition Timeline. Dad. Derek and I have spoken with our attorney and with Patrick's estate planning advisor. Given the property values and the upcoming rezoning discussion in your area, the window for an optimal transfer is closing. We want to begin the paperwork process within 30 days. The attached document outlines the transition agreement. The right of residence clause covers 24 months. Derek has a relationship with a senior living community in Brentwood. Lovely facility, very well regarded. We think you'd be really comfortable there. I called Claire immediately. Did you write this email, or did Derek write it? A pause. We wrote it together, Daddy. That's not true, Claire, and you know it. Another pause, longer. Derek helped me with the language. He's an attorney. He knows how to structure these things. I asked to speak with Derek. There was a muffled exchange. Then Derek came on the line. Frank, I appreciate that this feels abrupt, but Claire and I have looked at this from every angle. The property is too large for one person to manage responsibly. The workshop is a liability. The market conditions won't hold. This is the financially sound decision. I told him I understood. I told him I'd need to review the attached documents carefully. He said his assistant could schedule a signing appointment for the following Friday. I said that sounded fine. Then I hung up and made the first of 3 calls. First call. My corporate attorney for 14 years, a woman named Judith Crane, who once told opposing counsel, in a licensing dispute, that she found their argument charming in the way she found most things charming that were also completely wrong. Judith, I said, my son-in-law just sent me a document trying to acquire my personal property. I need a counterstructure within 48 hours. She asked me 2 questions. Is the property currently in your name alone? Yes. Has anyone filed any legal action? Not yet. Good, she said. Give me the details. I did. When I finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds, which from Judith is the equivalent of a long silence. What exactly do you want to accomplish here, Frank? I want my daughter to understand what she's participating in. I want her husband to understand who he is dealing with. And I want the property placed somewhere none of them can reach it. Consider it handled. She called me back in 36 hours with documents that transferred my personal property into a family trust structured specifically to remove it from any future spousal claim, marital estate argument, or elder intervention petition, with Morrison Industrial Coatings itself held in a separate entity structure that had existed for years, entirely bulletproof. The deed situation was resolved before Derek's signing appointment ever arrived. Second call. My operations vice president, a man named Gerald Okafor, who has been with me since Morrison Industrial had 11 employees in 1 truck, and Gerald drove that truck himself when the regular driver called in sick. Gerald, I need you to pull every active contract we hold with Walsh-affiliated entities, Walsh Family Properties, Mercer, and Walsh. Connor Walsh's holding company, any building or development connected to the Walsh name in the Nashville metro. He called me back in 2 hours. Frank, we have 4 active service agreements. The Walsh Family Commercial Building on Charlotte Avenue, annual value $42,000. The Mercer and Walsh Law Firm offices, 3-year contract, annual value $68,000. A new condo development in Germantown that Connor Walsh is the principal investor on. We're the coating and waterproofing contractor on the parking structure. Contract value $340,000 over 18 months. And we just renewed the service agreement on Patrick Walsh's personal warehouse property in Smyrna. Annual value $26,000. That is $500,000 of Walsh family business. Terminate all 4. Effective end of business Friday. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Frank, I've known you a long time. You sure? Do it. Third call. My project development director, a young woman named Teresa Park, who had recruited Morrison Industrial into 3 of our biggest municipal contracts by sheer force of preparation and refusal to accept a no that she hadn't personally exhausted. Teresa, the Hartwell Bridge Rehabilitation Project in Davidson County. Derek Walsh's firm, Mercer and Walsh, is legal counsel for the project owner. Are we engaged on that project? She checked. We're shortlisted. Finalist presentation is in 3 weeks. We were the front runner. Pull our submission. Recommend Southeastern Surface Solutions instead. She pulled in a breath. Frank, that's a 4-year contract. I know what it is. Pull it. Derek's signing appointment came and went. I didn't answer his calls that Friday. I texted Claire that I needed a few more days to review the documents. She texted back a string of concerned messages that read very much like Derek was composing them over her shoulder. I let them sit. The event where everything came apart was the Walsh Family Foundation Gala, an annual fundraiser the Walshes organized to benefit a children's hospital in Nashville, which in a different context would be admirable. 200 guests, black tie, held at a downtown hotel ballroom. I had attended twice before, quietly, as Claire's father, wearing the same dark blazer I wear to every formal occasion I'm required to attend. This year, Claire called me 2 weeks before and told me it was especially important I come. That Derek would be receiving a community leadership award, and that it would mean everything to her. So I went. I drove my Sierra to the hotel valet, who looked at the truck with the kind of professional neutrality that means someone has been trained not to react. I walked in wearing my dark blazer and the tie Margaret gave me for our 25th anniversary. Claire found me immediately at the door with a smile that had relief in it, like she'd been worried I wouldn't show. "You look great, Daddy." She straightened my tie with the automatic tenderness of a daughter who grew up in a house where her father's collar was always slightly off. Derek appeared behind her, scotch in hand, in a suit that was clearly custom. "Frank, glad you could make it." He steered me toward the bar with the practiced ease of a man redirecting foot traffic. "Let me introduce you to some people." He walked me to a group of men I didn't know, investors and developers, and a city council member. Patrick Walsh was already holding court nearby and waved me over with the beneficence of a man who has recently done you a favor you don't know about yet. "Everyone," Patrick said, "this is Frank Morrison, Claire's father." Frank was in the painting business. Before he retired, he said retired the way people say it when they mean finished. The men shook my hand. One of them, a commercial developer named Gareth, asked what kind of painting. "Residential, mostly," I said. "Some commercial work here and there. Keeps me busy." Sandra Walsh appeared with a glass of white wine for Claire and nothing for me. "Frank," she said warmly, "so glad you're here." She turned to Gareth before I could respond. "You simply must hear about what Claire and Derek are planning. They've found the most extraordinary site in Williamson County." Gareth leaned in with professional interest. "Williamson County? What's the parcel?" Sandra beamed. "It's been in Derek's family for years, really. The Morrison land." She glanced at me with a smile. "Frank's been so gracious about the whole transition. Thinking of the next generation." I picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. "Easier on me in the evening," I told Gareth, who hadn't asked. The room filled over the next hour. I found a seat at the family table, which put me between Patrick Walsh and a woman who worked in Claire's design firm and talked exclusively about a kitchen renovation she was managing in Green Hills. Derek worked the room like a man who has spent his career understanding that success is performed before it is earned. He was good at it, I'll give him that. He knew how to make people feel noticed without giving them anything they could hold. The program started at 8. The MC made remarks about the foundation's work. A video played showing the hospital wing funded by previous galas. There was polite and genuine applause. Then Patrick Walsh took the stage to present the Community Leadership Award to his son. He spoke for 6 minutes about Derek's dedication to Nashville, his work on the foundation board, his future, the family Claire and Derek were building. He talked about the next chapter in very specific terms that included a reference to the beautiful property they'd be developing in Williamson County, where future generations of the Walsh family would put down roots. There was warm applause. Derek accepted the award with a speech that was well written and mostly sincere, and at the end he thanked his father, thanked Claire, and thanked me, his father-in-law Frank Morrison, for his generosity and his willingness to support their family's future. 50 people looked at me and applauded. Claire caught my eye from across the table and smiled, the smile of someone who has been told the hard part is already over. I waited until the applause settled. Then I spoke, not loudly, but in the silence that follows a program moment. A voice carries. "Derek." He turned, still holding the award plaque. "I have a question." He smiled the way he smiles in depositions, when he thinks he knows where something is going. "Sure, Frank." "Of course. Do you know who holds the waterproofing and protective coating contract on the parking structure for Connor's Germantown condo development?" He frowned. "What? The parking structure? The one they broke ground on in March. The coating contract for the concrete infrastructure." Derek glanced at Connor, who had gone slightly still at the adjacent table. "I'm not sure what you're asking, Frank. I'll tell you. The company holding that contract until last Friday was Morrison Industrial Coatings." He laughed a little, the way people laugh when they think someone has made an error they're about to correct. "Frank, Morrison Industrial is a major company. They do infrastructure work across the whole Southeast. That's not something you'd be connected to." I opened the company dashboard on my phone and set it on the table in front of him. Real-time numbers, active contracts across 3 states. Current headcount, 431. Year-to-date revenue, 41.3 million. Claire, who had moved closer when she heard the change in the room's atmosphere, looked at the screen. "Daddy, what is this? I founded Morrison Industrial Coatings in 2009. I am still the CEO. Company valuation as of last quarter is $67 million. My personal assets, including the company, the Williamson County property, the commercial building I own in Murfreesboro, and liquid holdings, total approximately $91 million. Patrick Walsh had gone the color of old concrete. "That is not possible," he said. "You drive a truck from 2006. "I do. I like that truck." Sandra Walsh set down her wine glass very carefully. Derek turned to Connor, who was already on his phone. The Gareth from earlier was very quiet and very attentive. Marcus from the city council was watching with the expression of a man storing something away for later. I stood up. Here is what has already happened. As of Friday afternoon, Morrison Industrial Coatings terminated all 4 active service agreements with Walsh-affiliated entities. The office building on Charlotte Avenue, the Mercer and Walsh firm offices, Patrick's Smyrna warehouse, and Connor's Germantown parking structure are all without protective coating, maintenance, and waterproofing service contracts. Connor's project is particularly time-sensitive. That parking structure has exposed concrete that needs treatment before winter moisture cycles begin. Finding a qualified replacement contractor at this stage of the build will be difficult. Connor stood up. "You can't just pull out of a signed contract. I can. The termination clauses were properly invoked. My attorney has already sent the documentation." Derek's voice came out strained in a way I had never heard from him before. "Frank, this is insane. You're blowing up our relationships, our projects, our professional standing, because we were trying to help you plan for your future." I leaned forward. "You tried to take my house. You drafted documents giving me 2 years in my own home before I had to leave. You had your father announce my property transfer as a done deal to 50 people at a gala when I had never signed a single page. You had your father's builder already engaged. And through all of it, not once did anyone ask me what I actually wanted." "We were protecting you," Derek said. "From what? You live like you're struggling. We had no way to know. You could have asked. You could have come to my property for any reason other than photographing it for tear-down potential. You could have asked your wife's father one question about his work in 7 years of marriage. One question." Claire put her hand over her mouth. She was crying. I hadn't planned to say what I said next directly to her, but she was looking at me, and it needed to be said. "Claire, I taught you that people are not what they own or what they drive. I taught you that because I wanted you to be someone who sees clearly. Somewhere in the last few years, you let someone else teach you something different." Her face crumbled entirely. "I'm sorry, Daddy. That is the truth, and I don't say it to hurt you. I say it because the woman who looked at the floor while her husband ran that meeting in my house is not the woman I raised." I picked up my jacket. "The Williamson County property was transferred to a family trust 2 weeks ago. There is no deed to sign. There is no transition to manage. There is no open question about where I will live. I live in my house, on my land, the same as I have for 22 years. Patrick Walsh found his voice. "Robert, be reasonable. My name is Frank." He stopped. I looked at him. "You advised my son-in-law that taking my property was the strategic move. You brought your son's holding company into this conversation. You introduced me to people tonight as a retired house painter, while standing on the strength of a family that currently had over $500,000 in annual contracts with my company. I said strategic because you seem to like that word. Strategically, Patrick, you have had a very poor week." I walked out of that ballroom. I drove my Sierra out of the valet lane. I sat in the parking garage for a moment with my hands on the wheel, and I thought about Margaret, who would have laughed about this in a way that made it hurt less. And then I drove home to Williamson County. My phone lit up with notifications before I cleared the interstate. Someone in that room had been recording. Clips were moving on social media by the time I got home. Secret millionaire exposes son-in-law at charity gala. CEO, dad reveals $91M empire after family tries to force him out. The internet decided within 12 hours that I was either the greatest father in Tennessee or a vindictive old man who had orchestrated a public humiliation. And both camps were passionate. I sat on my back porch in the dark and listened to the tree frogs and did not read any of it. Derek called at 11:30 that night. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at midnight. I turned the phone face down. Claire called at 12:45, and I picked up because she is my daughter and midnight is different. Daddy, I know. She was crying still. Or again. I need to ask you something. Ask. Did you know this was going to happen? Not exactly like that. But I knew something had to change. Silence on the line. Are you angry with me? I thought about it honestly. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed in a specific thing you did, and I've told you what it is, and now that's between you and your conscience. That's worse than angry, she said. I know. She was quiet. Daddy, I didn't write that email. I know that too, Claire. But you sent it. Another silence. When can I come see you? Come Sunday. Don't bring Derek. Not yet. Okay. She paused. I love you, Daddy. I love you too. Sleep. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable in the way that honest consequences always are. Derek lost the Hartwell Bridge project. Mercer and Walsh did not lose him, but they moved him from the infrastructure practice group, where he'd built his reputation, to a transactional real estate team where he would spend the next several years doing work he considered beneath him, which is probably exactly the medicine he needed. Connor Walsh's Germantown parking structure ended up with a replacement coating contractor who was adequate but not what Morrison Industrial would have delivered, and the delay cost Connor a penalty from his project lender. Patrick Walsh called me once, left a voicemail that was equal parts apology and complaint, and I did not return it. Sandra Walsh sent Claire a series of texts that were Claire's problem, not mine. Connor Walsh actually showed up at my property unannounced on a Wednesday morning, which I will give him credit for because it took nerve. I was in the workshop going through patent licensing correspondence when Gerald told me someone was at the gate. I walked out to find Connor Walsh standing by a rental car, because his own car was in the shop, dressed in work clothes that were clearly purchased for the occasion and did not fit quite right. He held out his hand. I shook it. I'm not going to pretend I don't know why we're here, he said. I asked him to come inside. We sat at the workbench where I'd done the original formulation work on the zinc epoxy system 15 years ago, and Connor Walsh told me, without any performance or positioning, that he had known the plan around my property was wrong from the beginning, that he'd said so to Derek once, and been told it was a family matter, and he should stay out of it, and that he hadn't pushed back the way he should have. He said the contract terminations were fair. He said Patrick was going to be angry at him for saying so. He asked if there was any path back to a working relationship. Not for his benefit specifically, but because he'd used Morrison Industrial on 2 previous projects, and the work was simply the best available, and he wanted to do right by his investors. I told him I would think about it. He nodded and stood up and shook my hand again and left, and I respected him considerably more when he drove away than I had when he arrived. Claire came on Sunday. No Derek. She brought groceries and made the beef stew Margaret used to make, from the recipe card I kept in the kitchen drawer. Her handwriting on an index card with a grease stain in the corner from the first time she made it. Claire stood at my stove and cried twice, and kept cooking both times. We ate at the kitchen table where she'd done homework for 12 years. We didn't talk about the Gala for the first hour. We talked about her firm, about a project she was genuinely proud of, a community center renovation in East Nashville, where she'd fought for months to get the clients to approve a design that was actually worth doing. She talked about it the way I remember her talking about things when she was 22 and still certain that her instincts were good. It was good to hear. She refilled my water glass without being asked, the way she's been doing since she was 14, and I thought about how much of who she is has nothing to do with the past 6 months, and everything to do with the 34 years before that. Daddy, she said finally, I need to say something and I need you to let me finish it. I let her. She said that she had told herself for a year that the property conversation was about practical planning, about being responsible, about not letting emotion get in the way of sensible financial decisions. She said she had let Derek reframe her concern for me into a transaction, and she had let it happen because it was easier than disagreeing with him in front of his family, and that was a failure of character she was still reckoning with. She said she knew I had built everything I had through specific choices, including the choice to drive a truck that needed no explanation and wear clothes that announced nothing, and that somewhere she had let those choices embarrass her, and that was also a failure of character. She put her hand on the table between us, palm up, the way she did when she was small and wanted to be forgiven for something. I put my hand over hers. The thing about being a parent, I told her, is that you don't get to decide who your child becomes. You influence it. You demonstrate things. You hope, but at some point your child is a person, separate from you, making choices you can't make for them. You made some poor ones. You're reckoning with them. That's the job now. She nodded. I'm going to do better, she said. I know that, I said. Otherwise we wouldn't be having stew. Derek called the following Tuesday, I answered. There was a pause before he spoke, the kind of pause that tells you someone has rehearsed several opening lines and abandoned all of them. Frank, I said nothing. I owe you an apology that I'm not sure I know how to give correctly. I told him to try. Another pause. I looked at you and I made a calculation. I saw the truck and the jacket and the wine you always brought, and I calculated that you were a liability I could manage. I calculated that I was doing you a favor by forcing a conversation you were too proud or too oblivious to have. He stopped. I was wrong on every factual level, and I was wrong on every human level, and I don't know which of those is worse. I thought about that. I told him the human level was worse, but the factual level was the part he was going to spend more time on. He laughed once, short and honest. That's fair. I asked him what he wanted. He said he wanted to understand one thing. He said he wanted to know at what point I had decided to expose him publicly rather than handle it privately. I told him the gala wasn't planned. I told him I went to watch my son-in-law receive an award and instead watched my son-in-law's father publicly announce a property transfer I had never agreed to in front of 50 people who had been told it was already settled. He was quiet for a long moment. He said he hadn't known his father was going to do that. I told him that might be true, and it didn't change anything. He said he understood. He asked if he could come on Sunday. I told him Claire came on Sunday. He said he knew. I told him to bring something to contribute to dinner. He showed up with the wrong kind of pasta and the right attitude, which is about as much as you can ask from a man learning something new. They sat at my kitchen table together. Derek, with the kind of careful stillness of a man who is not accustomed to being in a room where he is not running anything. Claire made dinner again. I watched my son-in-law wash dishes without being asked, without theatrics, just quietly putting things in order, and I thought about what it takes to get a person to that point. It usually takes something breaking. The conversations across the following weeks were not easy, and none of them were finished in one sitting. Derek was not transformed. He was altered, which is more real. He started asking me questions, actual questions, about the business, about how I'd built the epoxy licensing program, about what it had taken to win the first municipal infrastructure contract when Morrison Industrial was a 5-person operation with 1 truck and a good formula and no track record with government procurement. He asked badly, at first, the way lawyers ask things when they're still performing instead of listening. He got better. I told him about the 2 years when Margaret and I ate pasta 4 nights a week because we were putting everything back into equipment and payroll. He said he hadn't known Claire had grown up that way. I said she hadn't. By the time Claire was old enough to notice, the sacrifices were over. But I remember them. That's the point of them. Patrick Walsh sent a handwritten letter 3 weeks after the gala. 3 paragraphs on good stationery. He said he had been operating from a set of assumptions he had not examined, and that this had caused harm to a man who had earned the right to his own choices. It was more self-awareness than I expected from Patrick Walsh, and I gave him credit for it. I did not invite him to Sunday dinner. That is a different chapter, if there is one. Sandra Walsh apologized to Claire directly, and apparently meant it, which Claire told me about in a tone that suggested she was still processing whether to accept it. That is also Claire's chapter. 6 weeks after the gala, Gerald came to me with a question about the Connor Walsh situation. Apparently, Connor had reached back out through formal channels, requesting a conversation about resuming a service relationship on a future development project, a warehouse campus he was breaking ground on in Rutherford County. Gerald wanted to know what to do with it. I sat with it for a few days. There is a version of wisdom that says, you hold every grievance until the holder breaks first. I've watched men I respected choose that version, and I've watched them carry it into rooms long after it stopped being useful. Connor Walsh had come to my workshop in poorly fitted work clothes and told me the truth without making it a performance. That is not a small thing. I told Gerald to set up the conversation. We'll see what the project requires and whether Morrison Industrial is the right fit for it, and we'll go from there. Business is business. Character is separate. Sometimes the same person contains both a bad chapter and a better one. My grandson, Jacob, Derek, and Claire's son, is 4 years old and has his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and his own completely specific personality that belongs to neither of them. He came with them on a Sunday in November and spent 45 minutes in my workshop watching me explain the difference between epoxy and urethane coatings. To him with absolute focused seriousness while holding a toy truck he had, brought from home. When I finished, he told me that his truck also needed painting. We found a can of red spray paint in the shelf and painted one wheel of his truck. Just one, because I told him we should see how that one looked before we committed to the whole thing. He agreed this was sensible. He is 4 years old. He told his father on the way home, according to Claire's text that evening, that Grandpa knows everything about trucks. I put the phone down on my kitchen counter and looked out the window at the workshop and thought about Margaret, who would have found this so funny, and about the 31 acres that will belong to whoever deserves to care for them. In time, through a trust that I have structured carefully and on my own terms. There are people who will tell you that the point of building something is to have something to show, that the accumulation is the proof. I have spent 40 years knowing that is wrong. The point is to be someone who can look back at what they built and know they earned every piece of it, including the pieces nobody else could see, including the piece where you drive the old truck because it still runs and you have nowhere to prove anything, including the piece where you let your family misunderstand you for 11 years because you believed they were good people who would eventually ask the right questions, and you were mostly right, even if eventually came later and harder than you hoped. Some lessons only arrive when they cost something real. Brandon is paying something real now, and so is Claire, and so is Derek, and I am not glad about it exactly, but I am not sorry about it either. The most honest thing I can tell you is this. The people who see your work boots and decide you're not worth their time have already told you everything you need to know about whether their time is worth yours. I wasted a fair amount of time over the years trying to be worth something to people who had already written the number down before I walked in the room. I don't do that anymore. I go to work on Tuesday. I drive the truck. I sit on my porch in the evening, and I listen to the land that is mine. If you're watching this, leave me a comment about where you're from. And remember that what people see when they look at you is their problem, not yours. What you've actually built is the only number that matters, and you're the one who knows it.